problem is to isolate our x variable and keep everything else in terms of p and k. So we want p and k to be together. We want x to be alone. So what should we do first? Yeah, distribute. You can divide by 2 if you want to, or if you want to clear the parentheses. We get 2x plus 2k equals p. What's the next part? Subtract k, good. Can we combine negative 2k and p? No, I can't put them together. So I'm going to move negative 2k off to the side. It's up to you which value you want to write first. I'm just going to leave p first. Then what's final step? Yeah, we're going to divide everything by 2. I wrote x instead of k. Oops. I'll fix that. There you go. So we're going to have x equals p minus 2k all over 2. That's all you have to do. So the algebra is exactly the same as what you did in Algebra 1. You did also learn this in Algebra 2 as just a refresher. The ACT might make this problem a little more challenging. They might give you a fraction to start off with, just to make it a little more intimidating. But all you're doing is solving for just a variable, and that's all. Now, you can write that answer a different way. So you can write here, you can leave x here, and then this 1/2 can go underneath p. So you might also see it like this, 1/2 p, negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1 minus k. So this answer is the exact same answer as this one. All they did was just divide each individual term by 2. So just know, if your answer is not there, that doesn't mean you did it wrong. It just means they might have simplified it a little bit or wrote it a different way. So these two answers are exactly the same. One, we just pulled the fraction away and divided everything by 2, whereas the other one, we just kept it together. So try the next one. We're going to solve for x. Okay, so to simplify this problem, our goal is to get x alone. So the first thing you want to do is move PA and GH. You can move them at the same time. It's totally fine. Just don't combine them all together. Like, don't combine all the numbers or letters together without pluses and minuses. So I get BXY equals D plus G minus PA plus GH. Now, you can write those in any order that you want to, so don't be afraid to rearrange the problem if it's not matching how you've written it. So that top can be moved around. Then what's my next step? Yeah, we want to divide by B and Y, and I would suggest doing it all together. That way you don't have to divide by B, then write it all, and then divide by Y. You can do more than one step. So my X is equal to D plus G minus PA plus GH all over BY. So those are just literal equations where you're just solving for a variable. Okay. Are there any questions on how to isolate a particular variable, what kind of math I want to use, things like that? Anything? It's all math you've learned before. It just might have been something that we might have forgotten. Okay, the next particular way to solve an equation is by cross-multiplying. So one common mistake that we have when we cross-multiply is we write your answer as a fraction. The whole purpose of cross-multiplication is to get rid of the fraction. So when you cross-multiply, the fraction goes away. So to cross-multiply, you want to make sure that you're multiplying the numerator of the first times the denominator of the second. And when it gets a little bit weird is if you forget that the 7 gets multiplied to everything. So when you have a binomial, which we'll classify tomorrow, I would put it in parentheses and put the 7 on the outside. That way you don't forget that 7 goes to all of it. That's the trickiest part. You want to make sure that 7 goes to everything. And then you're going to do the exact same thing, but with 5 times 3. And if you want to, you can simplify as you go. It's totally fine. But the most important thing is to make sure that when you do these problems, you don't write it as a fraction. It's not going to be 7 times 8 plus 2 over 15. The whole point of cross multiplying is to get rid of the fraction. It puts them on even playing fields. The only time that you can cross multiply is whenever you have two fractions equaling each other. If I have two fractions just in my equation and there's no equal sign, you can't cross multiply. So make sure that you distribute the 7. When I subtract the 14, I'm going to get 7x equals 1. Dividing both sides by 7, x is 1 over 7. So I know that the examples we're doing in class are a little bit basic, but the point is to practice just the math behind it. So I know that these problems aren't challenging. The worksheet is definitely a little bit harder. I just want to make sure that we understand the basics of how to solve all these different types of problems. Okay. So remember, cross multiplication, it has to be a fraction equals a number or a fraction equals a fraction. I can't just have 2 random fractions in my problem and cross multiply them. Don't make that mistake. And then when you cross multiply, the fraction goes away. That's the point of it. Okay. All right, quadratic formula. What is the quadratic formula?
X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
Good job. You guys all know the song? No, you don't. Who did you have for algebra 2? They didn't teach you the song?
Algebra 2?
Or algebra 1?
What's wrong?
She didn't sing it to you? It goes to like, what is it, Pop Goes the Weasel or something? It's like x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2x. Yeah? Tyler's like, I've never heard that song in my life. Okay, that's how you remember it. If you've never heard that song and music's not your thing, just learn it. That's the best I got. A lot of the times, though, the ACT, if you need to use the formula, sometimes they give it to you. So that's a plus. So if you've never seen it before, here it is. When do we use the quadratic formula? What is its purpose? Yes, when I cannot factor, quadratic formula is the way to go. Just, what are you doing? Just open it. It's okay. You make more noise when you're trying to be super quiet. We'll just all watch you. Okay, so quadratic formula, the next couple pages of our notes, page 3 and 4, we're going to factor. We're going to spend a lot of time on factoring because there's a lot of factoring on the ACT, and you need to know all the methods. But the quadratic formula is something that you learn in Algebra 1, and it's used in place of when you can't factor. Whenever you use the quadratic formula, the trinomial that you're using must equal 0. So if it does not equal 0 and you have to solve for x, you have to isolate everything to one side, keeping the ax squared positive. Okay? So when you're substituting, make sure to pay attention to the signs. Make sure that it equals 0. So it must equal 0. If it doesn't equal 0, you can't start using it. And we are going to spend some time on the quadratic formula, but when you're using it, you have to make it equal 0 because when you factor, you have to factor when it equals 0. That's why it must be 0, okay? When you're substituting using the quadratic formula, you just want to make sure that you're paying attention to all of the signs. So a is always in front of the x squared component. And when you substitute, you're going to substitute it here and here. Then you have the b value. Make sure that you pay attention to the sign in front of b. Now, since the ACT's goal is to trip you up any chance they have, chances are the b value is going to be negative because you have to square it. And they're purposely going to do that so you don't square it properly or you don't change this to a positive. So just be careful. The ACT is going to do that to you because they are paid to be mean to you. And that's their job. Then, let's see. We've got our C value. That's the constant. And it is located right here. When you type it into your calculator, you can do it all in one step. However, you want to make sure that you don't type it completely in the problem. You want to make sure that the first thing you type underneath is this part, b squared minus 4ac. So you want to simplify underneath first and then do the rest of the problem. That way, you're not using the square root button. If you use the square root button, there's no way to go back and get it again. So the ACT, remember, can all be done without a calculator. So people aren't going to know the square root of 87 off the top of their head. So they're going to have the square root in the answer choice. Since you have calculators, don't let that, don't get calculator happy and type it all in. You just want to type the underneath part and then plug the rest of it in and simplify, okay? We'll do plenty more practice on this when we get into the factoring unit, but I just want to make sure we've seen it before. The very last thing before we get into some practice is clearing fractions. On your test, there were some fraction problems that you might have missed. I do have your tests graded. You'll get them back on Monday. I'm not going to put the grades in Power School until like Sunday night. If you just like really have to know, I can tell you after school real quick, or like right as you're packing up if you just have to know now. But I want you all to have a good weekend and not think about your tests. So they weren't as bad as I think you guys think they might be. So, but if you want to know, I'll tell you after school. So to clear a fraction, you can do one of two things. Since you have a calculator, you can isolate this and just keep it as fractions and solve it. Or if your calculator dies and you start to freak out, you don't need to. You can solve it without one. So the first thing we're going to do is get common denominators. So in that first problem, what is our common denominator between 4, 3, and 6? 12. So I'm going to put 12 here. X plus something over 12. Oh, I did that in second period too. That should be a 12. So knowing when to use common denominators and recognizing what the common factors of numbers are makes this a whole lot easier. So what should we multiply the 3 over 4 by to get something over 12? 3. So I'm going to multiply this fraction by 3 over 3. Remember, all you're doing by multiplying by 3 over 3 is just changing how the fraction looks. You're basically unsimplifying. That's all. So I've got my 12. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 over 12 obviously can be simplified to 3/4. So we're just unsimplifying. All right, what are we going to multiply 2 over 3 by? 4. 4 over 4. So here I'm going to do 4 over 4. 2 times 4 is 8. Then what's the last fraction going to be? 2. So I'm going to multiply by 2 over 2. And I should get 14 over 12. How can I get rid of all of those denominators in one step? How do I clear all those fractions in one step? How do I take them out? Mathematically, what do I have to do to get rid of them?
Multiply the denominator by the... Wait, multiply the numerator by the denominator. I don't know.
Okay, I think I know what you're talking about. So multiply everything by what number? 12. Conjugates are used with square roots. And we will do conjugates. I think later on in this chapter, actually. Sometime. We're going to do conjugates. Yep, page 5 and 6. We'll practice. So to clear a fraction, the whole point of us putting 12 as the bottom number is to get rid of all the 12s. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 12. And what's going to end up happening is I do multiply the numerator, so I could do 12 times 9 divided by 12 is going to just give me 9. So all of these denominator values go away by clearing the fraction. And I'm just left with 9x plus 8 equals 14. Now the problem has no fractions. You got rid of them all. And now it's a problem that you can solve pretty quickly. So again, I know that the algebra of these problems is not like incredibly challenging, but it does give you just an example of how to solve these. So this becomes 6 over 9, which reduces to 2/3. Always make sure you're reducing. That'll make it a little bit easier to find your answer. Now, this can all be done with a calculator, but I don't want to just teach it, oh, use your calculator, because if something happens on the test and your calculator dies or you forget to bring it, this will help you. You can do all these problems without a calculator. Okay, as long as you know some basic multiplications, okay? All right, let's do the very last example, and then we'll just do our practice until 3, and then we'll start factoring tomorrow. So what's the common denominator between those fractions? 9. So this is going to be over 9 plus something over 9. And this is already over 9, so we're going to leave it 5 over 9. What does the 2x over 3 become? Yeah, 6x over 9. We just multiply by 3. What about the next one? What's 9 times 3? 27. Remember, this is technically over 1, so I'd multiply top and bottom by 9. How do I get rid of all those fractions at once? We're going to just multiply by 9. That's the whole point of getting all the fractions together with the same denominator, so you can just get rid of them all at once. Notice how we're not using a calculator. The multiplication is not that bad. Makes it easier. And we will be practicing multiplication next week. We're going to take those timed multiplication quizzes like when you were in elementary school. So you get 6x plus 27 equals 5. Okay. I'm going to subtract my 27. So 6x equals negative 22. When I divide by 6, I would get negative 22 over 6, or what does that reduce to? Yep, negative 11 over 3. Good job. One thing I do want to make sure that you understand about fractions, on your test from yesterday, there were some problems that had like 2 1/3. Do you guys know how to put those back together? So I'm just going to do a little side note over here. If I have like 2 2/3, do you know how to put that into an improper fraction? Yes, good. So if you need to do this in your calculator, 2 times 2/3 is not the same as 2 2/3. So you can't do 2 times 2/3 to simplify that. So you would have to do 2 times the denominator, and then whatever you get, you add the top. So 2 times 3 is 6. 6 plus 2 is 8. So you would get 8 over 3. So on your test, you did have to know how to do that, but that question was asked in second period, so I wanted to make sure that I went over it with you guys in case you didn't know how to do it. All right, so what we're going to